Welcome to Maestro Productions podcast, where we share stories about arts, education, and social justice movements. In today's episode, we talk to lifetime civil rights activist Dave Dennis. Mr. Dennis joined the Freedom Rides in the early 1960s and soon after became a full-time movement organizer. He served as co-director of the Council of Federated Organizations, as the director of Mississippi Congress of Racial Equity, and was one of the central organizers of the Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964.
My name is David Dennis. I'm presently living in South Carolina, Summerville, from northern part of Louisiana, born in Omega, Louisiana, which is on the plantation in Shreveport, south of plantation for 9 years of my life. And then from there, went on to went to school at Dillard University, where I joined the civil rights movement in CORE in 1960, and then had some activities with Freedom Rides in Mississippi and Louisiana for registration work and sit-ins through 1968. And here I am.
I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about Mrs. Septima Clark and also Mrs. Bernice Robinson and how you came to know them and see them and what role they had in the work you all were doing.
Yeah, well, my relationship with them, with both of them, they used to do these board education workshops in Highlander Center and Penn Center in Beaufort, South Carolina. And so my work there, my relationship there was attending those workshops. Attended one in Highlander and one in Beaufort, South Carolina. That would have been in around 1961, 62. I think it would be one of those 2 years there. And so what they did was, they were both are fantastic women. In fact, had relationship with and met and talked to Bernice more than I did with Septima. I met her twice. But now I recall that I met with on several different occasions in similar type workshops and stuff. And I think that Bernice Robinson came to Mississippi at one time. In fact, is that when Mrs. Hamer and them were beaten and were known in Mississippi in 1963, they were coming from a workshop at Highlander Center at the time. And so that was, they hosted and did workshops with a lot with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, also people, Dr. King and those, at both at the Highlander Center and at Penn Center. And the significance of both of those centers are in connection with Septima Clark and with the Penn Center was fantastic, because Penn Center really was one of the first educational schools opened up for people of color back around in 1860-65 area pieces. In fact, that was the beginning of public education between what was going on in the low country of South Carolina, moving on into Orangeburg, South Carolina, where the first public schools were created back around 1866, 67. Right, so that was my relationship with them. Is I didn't get a chance to form what you might call a very close relationship. They were really all related to these particular workshops and being with them and what they taught. So really getting from them was a better connection, I guess, in terms of the need for Black people to become more politically involved in the countries. And there's a guy by the name who worked with Septima Clark and Bernice quite a bit by the name of Jim McCain. And Jim McCain came out of the NAACP, and he was from Sumter, South Carolina. And he became a field secretary for CORE back then. In fact, one of the people who worked with him was James Clyburn when he was young in South Carolina as a field secretary for CORE. A lot of people don't know that about Jim, Mr. Clyburn, that he was very much involved in the movement when he was a youngster and a teenager. And so Jim McCain is really one of the reasons why I even got involved in the movement. One of the first meetings, civil rights organization I went to, I was really trying to get a date with another female by the name of Doris Castle, who talked me into going to a meeting, a core meeting. And that was our, if you want to call it a date, was the first date. It became the only date, really. And so one of the people who was there presenting about core was Jim McCain. But Jim McCain worked very closely also with Septima Clark and Bernice Robinson and the voter registration work in South Carolina area.
What do you remember sort of gaining or learning at those workshops? What did that give you as a young activist and organizer?
Well, when I get involved in the civil rights movement, there are two things that I've been taught, that the two pathways to freedom at that time among elderly Black people, although they all talked about, was education and citizenship. So you're talking about and out of that you get the political power, because education was connected to citizenship because you had to know how to read and write in order to register to vote at that time. So there's a strong connection. So what Bernice and Septima Clark brought to the table was the fact is that connection. They were very much committed to the issue around the need for Black people to become educated and learning how to do the basics of reading and writing, whatever. And at the same time is to become involved politically. So they made that connection. So they made that connection very clear, much clearer. And it was right in line with the kind of work that I've become connected to, committed to back in 1962. Although I joined the movement in 1960, and I was doing sit-ins and things of that nature. But the connection between this whole piece of education and citizenship came through Jim McCain, who had a strong relationship with them, Bob Moses, who opened up the door about what was going on in Mississippi, who actually got me to go to Mississippi in April of 1962, it was, from Louisiana. And so that connection was being made much clearer along those lines. So what I've been hearing, sit-ins were important because it brought to consciousness to the country about what these slap you in the face and discrimination and segregation. But really underneath that was what's going to make the real changes. There were certain people who really pushed to the fact is we got to get into the political struggle, because connected to that is everything else around economic development and economic power. And so Bob Moses is one of those people, and Jim McCain was another, and there's the Septima Clarks and those people. And then there was all the elderly people who all were connected, this network, which Septima Clark and Bernice Robinson was part of this network of Blacks, especially in the South, is moving toward I think how you call it, a shift from the early 60s in terms of this whole sit-ins and so what we call direct action to more political kind of orientation, a direction of focus. And so that was, they helped to make that connection, to me, and made it clear because they were heavily committed to the whole education piece also.
And how was it that Bob Moses convinced you or invited you to come to Mississippi?
Well, we had been doing some demonstrations. I had been with students from Southern University in 1961, beginning really in October of 1961. And a bunch of us, students were arrested for sit-ins in December of 1961. And then we stayed in jail over the holidays, what we have here. So a lot of the students were kicked out of school. And so we had been arranged to be staying at the Lincoln Hotel, where the hotel owner let us use the second floor, because we had no place, and the students had no place to stay because they were kicked off campus. And some of the parents would not let them back home, because all of a sudden they were like criminals, right? But at any rate Bob Moses at the same time was starting his work around voter registration and activities in Macomb, Mississippi. So he heard about what was going on in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge. So he came down with a group of other SNCC workers, Dion Diamond and a couple other people. And they came out to recruit some of the students. And so he wanted to talk to me about what they were doing and see if we get some of the students to go to Macomb, Mississippi. So he and I met, and that was my first time meeting him. And he talked to me about what was going on in Mississippi. And what they were talking about was some of the things that Jim McCain, who's with CORE, was also in my ear about. The fact is, you need to shift from this direct action to this whole political pieces around voter registration. And so Bob then came back in February, I think it was, February 1962, to visit again. So in talking to him, as he's pretty much, had me very interested going on, because we weren't having any real traction in Baton Rouge at the time for a lot of different reasons, which I explained in a book that's coming out. My son has written a book called The Movement Made Us, that'll be released in May, on May 10th. But it explains a lot of this stuff in this, giving him a plug. But at any rate is that was the beginning. So, and at the meantime, the person who was in charge of core activities in Mississippi, Tom Gaither, had to leave Mississippi to go to the service. He's being drafted, so he's trying to get back into school. And so I asked CORE if I could take his place. And the real reason for that is so I wanted to be closer to what Bob and them were doing in Mississippi. And so that's how I got into Mississippi. So I went into Mississippi in April of 1962 and began to work with Bob and them in the development of COFO, the Council of Federated Organizations, and the whole Freedom Summer pieces, the Freedom Democratic Party, all that's all evolved from that, going in during that period of time, 1962. But it was a very interesting thing about that is, so Bob and I stayed together, till his death. I had the opportunity to talk to him, a few hours before he died. So we had been together, close friends, and worked together from 1962 on through. And so one of the things that I learned, I started working with Bob with the Algebra Project, which is what I still do, is that one day we were just talking, he was talking, I told Bob, I said, you always tell the story about when you came to Atlanta, you met Ella Baker, and Ella Baker sent you around to meet some leaders in the South, especially Mississippi and Louisiana. So I'm just curious, I said to Bob, who did you meet in Louisiana? So he said, well, it was this guy who was a dentist in Shreveport, Louisiana. I can't think of his name right now. I said, would it have been Dr. C.O. Simpkins? And he said, yeah, that's the guy. Well, Dr. C.O. Simpkins was my dentist and my mentor in the movement at the time is, and I grew up there because I grew up in Shreveport, and so he was the one got me involved as my mentor after I became involved in the movement. So it was really how the roads crossed, and crossed, and we didn't know about it all these years before that. Yeah, well, I sort of talk about it, and my son was able to draw out a lot of stuff when he was doing this book because he realized that there's so much stuff I had buried, I'd forgotten, stuff is to get all of that out there. So a lot of things I began to realize had to do with what I call fate. It's just that, I'll give you a quick example. For instance, I ended up living with my aunt in my senior year in high school in Baton Rouge. And so I went to Southern University Lab School. And one of my best friends there was the guy by the name of Hubert Brown. And so his brother was leading a demonstration from Southern University students, which was the lab school sat right on the campus there. And his brother kept trying to get us to join. Hey, come on. We just said, no, I don't have anything to do with this. So we just wanted to play basketball and stuff. So we go to Hubert's house and we played basketball during that time. And so we didn't get involved with anything in the movie pieces. Well, it turned out who Hubert was or is H. Rap Brown. That's my best friend at the time. So we just joke around. He was Hubert and Dave. So when I call this fate, because how things circle around, all this comes together later. We became still best friends, but I didn't even know that he was in the civil rights movement. I didn't know that he was H. Rap Brown. I didn't know that. So I was in, he had been very active, but he wore this tam and stuff like that, and we called him Rap Brown. And so I never got a good look at it, and he changed the feature where he had this hat on, cap and stuff like that. So I was at the SNCC office in Atlanta with my friend Rudy Lombard. And so people were talking about Rap Brown is coming, Rap Brown is coming. And I told Rudy said, well, we got to go. So I said, no, I want to meet this guy, Rap Brown. So he said, all right. So we sat down and waited for him. So he come to the door and I looked up and I said, Hubert. And so he looked, he turned around and said, Red. That's what he called me in school, So all of a sudden, you hate Rap Brown. I had no idea. So I called it a lot fate, I mean, my getting involved with CORE had to do with the fact is that I was trying to date this lady. I mean, it wasn't because I had this drive to be part of the civil rights movement, a member of CORE. I mean, she talked me into going there because she said, if you want to have a date with me, you need to come to this meeting. I mean, so that's just, to me, as a whole, you put it all together. The Freedom Rise, the same thing is. It was like, I didn't have any real thing is, but I got my religion of baptism into the movement was after I got into Montgomery, Alabama to join the Freedom Rise for a different reason. Because I was still chasing Doris. She was going to go on the Freedom Ride, right?
Was she on the Freedom Ride too?
Yeah, she was on that same bus. That was on. It's on the first bus from Montgomery to Jackson. To continue the rides at the time is. But I might have would have gotten involved some other way if you're going to talk about fate. But at that time, exactly right. I wanted to go to school because I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school, So here's my opportunity. I got lucky, got a scholarship. So here's my opportunity to go into get a degree, and I wanted to be an electrical engineer. That was my dream, And so that all began to change because of my going to this meeting and being introduced to these great people, who really moved through them and ended up on a freedom ride by accident. In one sense, we might call it that. And to make me committed I was in this house. It was Dr. Harris. He was a pharmacist, and so Dr. King, all these people I've been reading about, these great people, Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, Y.T. Walker, James Bevel, Diane Nash, people all in this room. I'm in this room. So, and there were 4 other people from New Orleans that joined. Was going to go. They really got me. One of them being Doris, right? And so I'm there trying to think about how am I going to get out of this and get back to school. To be honest with you, they would start moving on. So the elders were trying to convince the young people not to go, and if we should take a moratorium because someone's going to die. So that's this thing going back and forth. I'm hoping that the elders will win the argument. Because I was getting back to school. My mom didn't know where I was, anything like that. And so all of a sudden is, and true story, and they say, I hear this, somebody says in this room, that there's not enough space in this room for both God and fear. Then all of a sudden it was like, bam, everything made sense. And so I was really committed. But the strange thing about that is I've asked a lot of people about this over the years who was there, who said that? And no one remembers hearing it but me, I mean, was it my head or whatever it is on that? I mean, somebody had to remember that, So I just developed the faith saying that something, driving caused me to gravitate to the movement. But after that is things change in my whole life is there was no real fear, just, I was, whatever was there, you had to be done, you do it. Everything changed. I was committed after that. It was no going back. It was like, school, whatever it is, up and so, let's get this done.
And then at what point did you start to be based in Mississippi?
In April 1962. When I moved to Mississippi in April, I went to Mississippi to stay in April. It wasn't just to visit Bob and them. It was going in to take over to direct the program for CORE. And so when I went there, I was the only person from CORE in Mississippi, and then began to build from there. And so we soon, several months into that, we got involved with this COFO piece, which has already been there. It was put together by local people to support the Freedom Ride in 1961. So Bob and I was working on this voter registration piece. So we decided to try to figure out how to get COFO involved, because at that time it was representing all of the civil rights groups there in the state. And this is primarily put together by Meg Evans and Dr. Aaron Henry and Amazon Moore and those people like that involved. And so we came in and we got them to put together a committee that dealt with voter registration and voter education in the city, in the state rather. Bob and I became co-directors of that committee. I mean, a lot of this written up is as if we started COFO, but we did not start COFO. COFO was already done by local people. But my going into Mississippi in April was I was there for the duration. Yeah, when I think about it, I mean, it's a good question, because I had no plan, like I'm gonna be there for a month or two, something like that is. It was all about the movement, So I had no plans of leaving. I think the white people had more plans for my leaving than I did.
Could you talk a little bit about this sort of the role, the relationship between voter registration and voter education? What was the fundamentals of the voter education?
Yeah, that was something that was also stressed by both Bernice and Septima Clark. It's one thing to have the right to vote, being registered vote, is a tool in the sense that, but how to use this to get some political advantage and stuff like that is, and the power of political power, you have to understand how to use it. So voter education had to do with what's important, and how to use it. So how to organize people, not only to get registered, but also how to organize them to become politically active and make this into some type of a power base. So that's what they stress. So that's the differences. So we begin to stress a lot around voter education and voter registration, put them together. So how do you use this tool, to gain freedom and to really secure first-class citizenship? And we were successful to some extent, but we still have an issue there about people understanding that you have to really begin to figure out how to use this as power, as a tool. So, for instance, at one time, Mississippi had more Black elected officials per capita than any other state in the country. At the same time, they still remain, for Black people, at the bottom of the totem pole when it comes to economic development and stuff and political power. So, and in education. So therefore, the learning how to do this is still in a learning in process. We have not capped that yet. And a good example of that again is that you got, you've had the Civil Rights Bill and the Voting Rights Bill in 1964-65. And I call the 1964 Civil Rights Act as, the Trojan horse of the civil rights movement. That is, they use that, the other side used that more as a tool to destroy the civil rights movement, rather than, we did not counter, figuring out how to use it to strengthen what we did in the movement. So you had the Moynihan Report, which is part of this connected, that is that to attack the Black family, whatever you have is, which would happen to have been the strength of the civil rights movement for Black people. That is the extended family concept. The whole idea of having a biological parents, one of the first things done with all this over here and enslaved people was to separate the family. That was the men out, and that never stopped. All the Jim Crow laws and others would target Black males, put them in prison when we have this, to take them away from the family structure. So you look at all of that, put in there, the urban renewal, the expressways going right straight through the Black community economic basis, the destruction of the economic base in the Black communities, because people believe we did have an economic base, but it's not true. On our own grocery stores, everything you had that. And that was power, how to put that together. So it was really, figuring this out, and you got Obama as the president. Well, that was a great opportunity for 8 years to really organize, use this tool. So we were celebrating. So we missed the boat in some places. I think it has a lot to do with not placing enough emphasis on the education piece, rather than voter registration, getting people registered to vote. So you still hear that we got to get people registered to vote. For what? We got to figure out how to answer that question.
And so on that, in terms of the voter education workshops, did you all invite Mrs. Clark and Bernice Robinson? Did CORE and SNCC invite Septima Clark and Bernice Robinson to come to Mississippi to conduct the citizenship classes or voter education, or did they come through SCLC, or was it, what could you say?
Yeah, I don't recall, and it could have happened in places, but in Mississippi, I don't recall inviting them, but they trained people. There was a lot of people, especially with SCLC and others, and also with CORE and SNCC, who attended these workshops. And they came back with whatever they had there to help conduct local workshops and stuff, and pass the word on. I don't remember, and I'm quite sure they possibly did, but I wasn't part of that. I'm bringing the men I don't recall. And I'll be honest with you, I have to talk to my son. Maybe he's found all these documents and stuff, and he's constantly telling me, "Dad, you remember this?" But I'm like, "I don't remember that." He said, "But I got something here that you ought to see." It's that, and we also what we discovered, I think that he and I with this doing this book, is that you tend to, under that kind of stress, how many, we didn't know anything about PTSD. So you're living under these conditions like 4 or 5 years or more. Some people never got out of it at all, in one sense or another. But those are very stressful, day in, day out pieces. So a lot of things is that I had suppressed were things that I should remember. And then to remember him when he's able to pull it out of him by showing me documents and stuff like this is, and all of a sudden, you start crying, because it's very painful stuff. Is, people you talk to, and then they're not there next to them. So you forget that. Or you suppress it to the extent that you don't. So there's a lot that's in there. So, talking to other veterans from the civil rights movement lately is about this. And they suffered, to tremendous amount of anxieties and stress because they just have suppressed all this stuff. Jimmy Travis, a very good friend of mine, I was at we have the Mississippi Veterans of the Civil Rights Movement that meets on every year. And so when I was speaking at a workshop, clinical workshop, around this issue of what the psychological impact it had on workers and stuff. So in talking about this is Jimmy Travis, he's passed away now, but Jimmy Travis used to call me at least once a month, faithfully, is to say, just checking to see how you're doing, my brother. That's what he would do. And so when I finished talking about this issue, well, number one is what shocked me was I got a standing ovation from veterans who said, glad somebody decided to talk about But then Jimmy Travis' daughter came up to me and she says, Dave, let me tell you about my dad. So Jimmy Travis was shot. He and Bob Moses and them were leaving the Delta. And they were attacked by the Klan, and the car was shot up, and Jimmy Travis was shot. She said, for up until my daddy died, the hardest time of his life, shooting firecrackers, he'd run and jump under the bed. So those kind of things, the impact that we don't deal with, don't talk about in the movement and stuff is. But at any rate, is on the other question is about pulling those two things together. With September Clark and about voter education and voter registration differences. That's what those workshops were about.
And I know there's sort of this question also in terms of voter suppression, which is obviously still going on, major issue right now. But one of the methods for voter suppression at that time was the literacy tests.
Right.
And so I know, that illiterate white people would pass the test and Black PhDs would not be allowed to pass the test by the registrar. But I also have heard a little bit about you all doing, teaching classes and reading and writing and doing this kind of basic literacy work. Could you talk about that particular work in a bit? Like who was coming to you all for literacy work, or were you all encouraging it? Did you do any of that yourself? What role did that?
It was a combination of both, all three of those, that we were actually dealing with, right? You would actually take parts of the tests, we were able to get our hands through it through primarily the federal government and stuff is to help teach people how to deal with it. It was almost an impossible test, like Mississippi, for instance. You have to interpret parts of the state constitution, and they're cut out, take a section, article, whatever, and say, here, read that, and then interpret, write down what that's all about. So really, it was really teaching the basics. You couldn't teach anybody to pass that test. Then, in terms of, you had to know something about mathematics, arithmetic. So their math question was, and really truly was, how many bubbles in a bar of soap? It's impossible to answer those questions, And so you would go in and do this, but what we had to do here was had to deal with the importance of it and doing the basics, how to write your name. So a lot of people could even do that, So the people we focused that on were both the young people and adults, because we use the young people a lot to help their parents, to do this piece. When we had the freedom schools, what shocked us about the freedom schools, it was really designed for the kids, with a lot of emphasis on their history, who they are and what we have is. But then the basic things of reading, writing. Some of the freedom schools, the shocking was that the amount of adults were attending the freedom schools. So they would come, and the parents would come because they wanted to learn how to read, to write, basic and stuff is. So that was a strong connection. And so the whites were having at the time, it's a time to have the cake and eat it too, you might call it is. So they made a strong connection also. So they attacked to keep people from learning how to read and write, although they made it a requirement to become a registered voter in the state. So to combat that is, we had to deal. We knew we couldn't beat this, that game. But what we had to do is try to get the game changed in our favor to all extent. We had to get the country to understand what was going on in Mississippi. So that came when we had the Freedom Democratic Party and the Freedom Vote and stuff like this, where people, we would take the test geared after what's going on in New York or the place like that, very simple, 5 pieces, and have our own mock elections and have our own mock voter registration pieces. So we start setting up these things in churches. What we have is, and get people to register into the Freedom Democratic Party pieces. That was just to demonstrate 2 things. One is let people understand this pieces and one that's willing to do it, but also let the country begin to understand that number one, the country was saying is people putting out that Blacks were complacent. They really weren't interested in registered vote because if they were going to register to vote. There's nothing to stop them. They will learn something about the Constitution. What the hell you're talking about? How you do that. But people have to understand without the country what's really going on. So that was while we did this. And the voter education piece and the education piece became a connection, but we had to let the country understand that how it's being used against us too. So then it would be for people willing to do this, and although they had this all these obstacles. I mean, people being threatened, people being fired from their jobs. Pictures are being taken in. So, some of the local newspapers will print the people names and addresses who attempted to register to vote. So that was intimidation. People found out about it. But one of the things is that stood out about this to me about the willingness of people at some point began to say, I've got to do this. So there's one story, if you have time, just very quickly. And we had a freedom vote thing at exercise at Canton, Mississippi, and we try to get as many people possible to come in. So all of a sudden, coming up was this couple, elderly couple. The lady was dressed in a long dress with a bonnet on, and the man his elderly. They had to be in their 60s or 70s, and he had on a pair of overalls with a white shirt and a tie on. In his best. And the wagon was being pulled by a mule. And he came up there and he got off and he left his wife and he spoke to us. He wanted to know where could he go and vote for George Raymond. George Raymond was a field secretary for Corps in Canton, Mississippi. So we explained to him that, this is where you go to register to vote, not where you're not going to vote. He said, well, if I go to register to vote, can I then vote for George Raymond? So we said, whenever he runs for office, you can do that. He thanked, he went up, we walked up those stairs, and you had on each side of it, you had the sheriff. I'll never forget, his name was Billy Noble. You had all these people watching. Now, these elderly people probably spent all their lives in Canton area. And here they were confronting the system. And they didn't care. They went up there, did what they had to do to try to register to vote, came down. I'll never forget the gentleman. He helped his wife, I'm quite sure his wife, up to the wagon. He looked around and he tipped his hat. He had on the hat. And he said, thank you, gentlemen. And he got in the wagon and turned around, and you could hear the clip of. Well, no one that shows courage. It shows that, here people in the back didn't understand at the time that it's about the process. But they knew it was important to do, and they were willing to take that sacrifice to do it. But for us, a lot of us, for me personally, I can't get that image out of my head. This was in 1964. Reason why I can't get out of my head is because what haunts me is I don't know what happened to those people. And I don't know what happened to the hundreds of people who tried to register to vote and who went back in those backwoods. I don't know what happened to the people who housed the thousands of students who came down during the summer of the Freedom Summer. I don't know what happened to them. They were still killing people, And these people, we packed our bags, and we left in our different ways at the end of the summer. They had no place to go. And they knew that when they made that stand, when they did these things, those acts. So they talk about who's brave in the civil rights movement, who the real heroes are. Those, to me, are the people. And we have no way of honoring them because we don't know who they were or are. And that's the other sad thing about in what you might call, about the civil rights movement, what we missed something here. And say, we don't know. And there are a lot of stories. I was able to through what Davey, my son, did with this thing is to get a lot of those stories, which I thought was more important than anybody talking about what I did. These stories of these particular people in this book, because it's a different thing. It's about a father and son having a conversation about what experiences I had and what impact that had on him just to be able to hear about the stories, although he wasn't alive during that period of time. And especially about the people that he can't find anything about to read about it because we didn't write about it. So that part of the movement has is really what's the when we talk about the shoulders people stand on, these are the people who put the floor beneath what we did. There was a movement before we went to Mississippi and Louisiana, young people. We were able to do something they could not do, but they put a floor beneath us. And most of them are old NAACP people, because at that time, it was radical to be a member of the NAACP. That was a radical move, And so to be able to, to register to vote, to be able to try, to just go downtown, to do things is really have, was an act of bravery in a large sense. So we look at who we read about is the people we read about, and the people who really made it possible. They overlap a lot, but there's a big group of people that have made this possible. And Dr. King and them, when they march stuff, we had mass marches, a lot of people. But who's down there in the dirt, getting it all done, and night and day, during that period strip of time in Mississippi, the work we did there is we lost 19 people that people don't even talk about. We know about Cheney Goodman Swerner, we know about Medgar Evers and people like that. But we don't know. When they were looking for the bodies of Cheney Goodman Swerner, they were finding bodies. Their lives were taken.
Their lives were taken.
Yeah.
Their lives
They didn't get them. I don't think anybody wanted to die. Yeah. They were taken.
Thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you for this work and this legacy.